5 months staying indoors being good little bunnies. The campervan conversion is underway at last. Chris made a frame for the sofa bed and another frame for the camping gas stove. It was enough to be going on with, so we drove to Norwich and spent our first night camping on Miranda's Drive. Next morning we had a socially distanced breakfast with the French windows open for ventilation. Our next stop was at Will Lord's place, where we had booked a one-day workshop in bronze sword making. We made impressions of the sword in a box of oily, sandy stuff, just like Play-Doh, but more messy. Then we tipped white-hot bronze into the mould, which had been melted in Will's crucible. It was very interesting, although personally I would have preferred to make a brooch or a mirror, obviously. And we had 2 swords to bring home with us. Next stop, York. The smell of frying bacon permeated the entire campsite that morning, but we were the only ones with fresh pan bread. The orange wristband hanging from the knob is the Caravan Club's device for social distancing in the showers. You can only go in if there's a free hook to hang your wristband on. Next morning we drove off to the North York moors. The roads up there made the bus bounce so much that the side door slipped its catch and the alarm started screaming at us. It was then that Chris realised he'd fixed his lovely worktop against the door handle, so he had to smash the corner with a hammer in order to open the door and slam it shut again. We were heading for Wheeldale Moor. The sign said footpath only, so we parked at the roadside and toiled along this endless farm road under a spectacular sky. At last we crossed a river and climbed up a steep bank to a ridge where we found the Roman road Chris was looking for. Chris thought the culvert might be an original Roman one. It was lined with stones in the Roman manner. We met a man who told us that we should visit Brunswick Bay, which had the best beach in the area. After we came off the moors, we found a tea shop just down the road. It was COVID-safe tea and scones in disposable containers. Then we noticed a sign pointing to a waterfall, picturesquely called Mallion Spout. So we went down another steep hill and along a rocky track by the river in search of the spout. When we arrived, we found a bunch of young things cavorting all over the rocks and showing no regard for social distancing and no desire to leave, so we didn't go too close. But there was an interesting tree bowl with coins pressed into it. I've seen padlocks on bridges and rags on branches, but this is a new way of making a mark on the landscape to me. So the next day we took the man's advice and went to Brunswick Bay, where we had coffee, of course, before wandering along the wonderful sweeping sandy beach. We were told that there's jet coming out of the cliffs. There's plenty of black shale around, but how do you know if it's jet? Maybe you break it open to see if it's shiny. Lots of people have the same idea. And then there's another craze going on, painting pebbles and leaving them for other people to find. It was indeed a lovely little beach, and when we got the Sunday Times a few days later, we found it listed amongst the 10 top beaches in the country, so we were quite lucky, I think, to find it then. We thought we'd be able to take a steam train ride from Grosmont to Pickering because we'd heard an engine going along the track the day before, but on inquiring we were told that they weren't opening yet for another 2 weeks, and that when they did it was going to be a drastically reduced service, which hardly sounded worth the effort. The volunteers were clearly very upset by it. Since it was raining, we boldly went into a pub and had more tea. There were 7 of us in the bar, the most crowded place we've been in since the pandemic started. More coffee and pan bread. We'd used up all the bacon by now. Chris wanted to spend the day in York, so I thought, whatever, at least we'll be outdoors. We walked along the river, and further on we came upon a group of men with a fishing rod. They scowled and didn't make way for us. I tried to catch them surreptitiously in a selfie. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't fishing. It was raining on and off, but there was a happy atmosphere with people walking about and lots of pavement cafes doing business. We found a splendid takeaway lunch at this place, absolutely delicious. Then we walked along some of the city wall sections. Towards the end of the afternoon, Chris suddenly decided to drive all the way to Revo Abbey, but sadly, spontaneity is not always the best way to do things. We arrived just as it was closing. I photographed it from afar. Even more sadly, when we arrived at our next destination and found that we'd actually miscalculated and got there a day too early, we realised we could have seen the place after all. National Trust coffee today, highly organised. You go to one window to place your order and pay with your contactless card, and then you progress to the next window to pick it up. This is another waterfall with an interesting name, Aeroforce. People were being directed to go up on one side of the stream and down the other side in order to maintain social distancing, and there were crowds of people there. Some child had evidently decided to leave her mark by sprinkling iridescent plastic confetti hearts on the path. Also, there was a footstep in the middle of the stream. But despite the hordes of people, it was still possible to scramble around and find wild places. Oh, and that's what the footstep was meant for. Next day we decamped and set off at a leisurely pace towards our next campsite. We stopped in Cockermouth for, guess what, refreshments. Coffee, mandarin and almond cake, hand sanitizer, and an umbrella the man in the cafe shop lent us. He worked so hard to keep his customers happy. We went for a walk up a winding track with dry stone walls that looked about to fall down. The place we found for lunch was a country inn with a very tempting smell of Sunday roast wafting out of the kitchen. There was hand sanitizer and a one-way system, and the waiters were all wearing face masks, but while we had our lunch, I reckon we shared our air with over 20 people. It was a good lunch, though. The next campsite was Dockwray Field, and this is from a walk near where we were camped. It rained a lot that night and the next day, and so guess what? We had to find another tea shop to sit inside. The tables were spaced as per government guidelines. It just felt a little bit crowded for my liking. We must have been in a room with about 30 people. That's about the most we've ever been with since this crisis started. Then we went to see the Bowder Stone, a huge rock which apparently was a great talking point among the Victorians. And just to show how big it is, here I am standing at the bottom. And then we have Chris climbing to the top and looking over the edge, of course. And then we have the trick photo. We drove past another lake. To be honest, there were lots of lakes. After all, it is the Lake District, and lots of sheep too. And there was another beach listed in the Sunday Times top 10 beaches at a little place called St. Bees, so we drove there to see it. The beach cafe was closed, if it ever had been open, and the wind was blowing bracingly, so we wandered along the beach until we felt suitably braced. Here's Chris reading an entertaining book he got from the charity shop at our final campsite, Meathop Fell. Very pleasant, lots of mature trees.
The next day we went to Cartmill, looked inside the little village antique shop. The lady was very keen on social distancing. I had a coffee and Julia waited till later for an ice cream. Then we looked at the Priory, which is a fascinating building with a secondary tower above the first, set at 45 degrees to save weight, possibly unique in England. The other thing about it is that the windows are all of different periods. It was carried on throughout the 12th century, begun in 1195, and right up to the time of the dissolution they were still working on it. So you've got windows that are decorated, flamboyant, early English, perpendicular, quite amazing. The east window was lancets until a major reconstruction in the 15th century, when this incredibly large perpendicular window was put in with some original medieval stained glass. When I started to look up the walls in my usual fashion to see what's at the top, I spotted a pair of astonishing Victorian lead gargoyles with Art Nouveau designs with paste flowers. Never seen anything like it. We then went inside and had a most interesting time talking to the wardens who were showing people around. The reason for the tower being put at 45 degrees was because it saved weight. It was only 2/3 the weight of a conventional tower sitting on top of the first one, but it had to be supported by an astonishing series of squinches. After the dissolution, lots of bits of the masonry ended up in the local houses. There's 2 or 3 examples you can see here.
We tried to get onto the Lakeside and Haverthwaite steam railway, but then we found we had to book online and the only train was later in the day. So first we went to the Lakeside Motor Museum, which we also had to book online, even though we were standing right outside the museum. So we had a socially distanced wander around that, one way only, everybody wearing masks.
The big blue car was known as Al Capone's murder car, with bulletproof glass and reinforced doors and go faster than any police car. I had no idea it was in this country. When we got to the Haverthwaite and Lakeside railway station, we had a train which was an old 060 and it was in dreadful condition. The engine lurched, you can see the lurches, bonk, bonk, bonk. I reckon every bearing was just about shot. I think we managed about 15 miles an hour for most of the journey. It was, but it was through beautiful countryside, and it's quite something to travel on the old coaches with the varnish and everything. They didn't have a turntable here, so the engine has to back up, cross over to the opposite points, go back up with the train on the other side. We went to Ravenglass and, walking up to the Roman remains, came across this overgrown playing field. Rather sad, nobody's been on it for months because of lockdown. The Roman bathhouse here is the highest standing remains of a bathhouse in Britain, with even the niches with the plaster still adhering to the walls. And in 1 or 2 places at the top left of the picture as it comes through, I could detect traces of colour, so it's not just the base level plaster, even some of the top coloured plasters there. You can see the grey plaster covering of the stonework, and it is stone rather than brick and flint because the red sandstone is native to this area. You can see the thickness of the wall, fat end of 3 feet at that point and over 9 feet tall, with putt logs at regular intervals. I think this is undoubtedly one of the highest remaining Roman buildings in northern Britain. Again, you can see the deep red sandstone and layers of plaster laid over the top. All in all, a very, very impressive site. Then we went down to Ravenglass, to the Ravenglass and Boot miniature railway. 3-foot gauge, beautiful engine. The rolling stock's been much updated since I last came here, and it's now all glass covered and a Pullman one at the front. Incredible. Here we go. We went up Hard Knock Pass, which together with Rhinos are the 2 steepest motor roads in Britain for ordinary traffic, because at the top is the Roman fort of Media Bogdon. Has to be almost the most isolated Roman fort in Britain, and unfortunately I overshot it. The sign had disappeared, so we ended up right at the top of the pass, which I knew was wrong, and we had to walk down again. However, not to worry. On the crag in the middle distance, you can see the fort. It's not very clear at this point. The closer we get, the more clear the fort becomes. It's a late 1st century or early 2nd century creation, and it was in use pretty much throughout the Roman period because the route from Ravenglass via Boot up over the top and down eventually to Ambleside was one of the Romans' strategic routes in Britain. It's well strewn with pieces of stone, probably a lot of them from the fort. And the walls you can see in the distance are in fact the fort walls. As with Hadrian's Wall, quite a lot has been repiled up. There's a flint layer, or a slate layer rather, showing where the reconstruction started. Lots of sheep pens around here, I suspect, are Roman stone. It's built in the usual playing card manner, but it shows how rigid the military mind is because the west gate opens straight out over a pretty much impassable fell. So, but they were told you have to have 4 gates. They had 4 gates. There's a double granary here. So the unit was at most a quingenary cohort, 500 men, and there would be enough food to keep them going for about a year. A wonderful situation, a fantastic fort.
This is Wasdale Head, with the slopes going up to Great Gable on the left. We had wanted to do a hill climb and we had to wait till the last day because of the rain. And the last day happened to be the hottest day of the year so far. So we toiled up this slope, strewn with rocks. We stopped for our lunch long before we had reached the top. It was such slow going, but there was a little breeze that made it survivable.
We had to decide at this point whether we wanted to do Great Gable or Scafell Pike, and eventually, possibly unwisely, decided to have a go for Scafell Pike. Unfortunately, the route we were chosen at that time was incredibly rocky. It really was mountain goat territory in several points. And we got to within 500 feet, maybe 400 feet at the top of Scafell Pike. But for the first time in my life, I was defeated. We just hadn't got any legs left. Anyway, beautiful views of Great Gable and the small towns in the area.
I took my last photo just before we topped the crest of the hill and started a long downward journey along a rebuilt path made from stone steps which turned our legs to jelly. I've never felt so weak. I thought I was going to fall on my teeth at any minute. But we did make it to the bottom. Well done us.
Well, as far as I was concerned, it was really good to give the bus a good workout. I'm undoubtedly a slower driver than I was driving the bus because I was quite happy to pottle along at 60, which the bus is very happy with.
Oh, those little winding, bouncy roads. I was quite happy you were driving that slowly.
Well, yes, and in actual fact, on a lot of the roads up in the high end of the Lake District, 30 felt like you were racing. But the motorways at 60 were an absolute doddle. We had a very mixed bag of weather. Largely we got on with each other. We had a few scratchy moments, but again I think it was the stress of going away and new environment and everything else. But we both survived.
I hate having to adjust to different routines. I always take about a week to get used to being on holiday.
Julie just hates adjusting.
And then as soon as you get home you have to adjust again, but
yeah,
so it goes.
That's the way it goes. We had a great holiday.
Saw lots of sheep, drank lots of coffee.
We did that. We almost got to the top of Scafell Pike. We got to a motor museum and a steam railway. Hey, what's not to like?